The Co-Parenting Pact, a Charleston pet romance story. Summary: when free-spirited storm chaser Tempest and methodical veterinarian Lucas both fall in love with the same rescue dog at a Charleston animal shelter, neither is willing to give up their chance at healing. Their unconventional co-custody arrangement forces two wounded souls together, where coastal winds, southern charm, and one clever golden retriever named Storm Lucas Beauregard Cross create the perfect conditions for unexpected love. The Co-Parenting Pact. Chapter 1. Storm Warning. The barometric pressure was dropping. Tempest Cross felt it in her bones before she saw the numbers on her weather app, that familiar ache that meant change was coming. She stood on the rooftop deck of her French Quarter carriage house, laptop balanced on the wrought iron railing, watching dark clouds gather over Charleston Harbor. The wind carried the scent of rain and salt, whipping her auburn hair across her face as she typed her evening weather blog update. Hurricane season isn't just about the big storms that make the news. It's the smaller systems, the ones that build quietly and catch you off guard, that often do the most damage to your heart. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. When had she started writing about hearts instead of high-pressure systems? 8 months, 3 days, and roughly 14 hours ago. The exact moment her twin sister Gail had been declared dead at Charleston General Hospital after a drunk driver ran a red light on King Street. Tempest closed the laptop and rubbed her temples. The grief counselor Dr. Martinez had recommended said writing was healthy. She'd failed to mention it would make Tempest sound like a walking Hallmark card. The rumble of thunder in the distance made her decision for her. She needed company that wouldn't try to fix her or analyze her weather metaphors. She needed something warm and loyal and uncomplicated. She needed a dog. 30 minutes later, Tempest pushed through the glass doors of the Charleston Animal Society, the familiar smell of disinfectant and hope filling her nostrils. The lobby buzzed with the controlled chaos of a busy Saturday afternoon, families with excited children, elderly couples speaking in hushed tones, and volunteers leading potential adopters back toward the kennels. "Can I help you?" A woman with kind eyes and premature gray hair approached from behind the reception desk. Her name tag read, Sarah Mitchell, Adoption Coordinator. "I'm looking to adopt," Tempest said, then added quickly, "A dog. Just me and a dog." Sarah's smile widened. "Wonderful. Are you looking for any particular breed or age?" "Something that needs me as much as I need it." Something flickered across Sarah's expression. Recognition, maybe, or sympathy. She'd probably heard that line before. "I have just the guy. Follow me." They walked past kennels filled with barking dogs of every size and disposition. Tempest's heart clenched at each hopeful face, but Sarah led her purposefully toward the back of the facility, stopping in front of a large kennel in the quieter section. Inside, a golden retriever mix with soulful brown eyes lay on a donated blanket, chin resting on his paws. His coat was the color of summer wheat, with white markings on his chest and paws. A small scar ran along his left ear, giving him a rakish, weathered appearance that spoke of survival. "This is Storm," Sarah said softly. "He's about 3 years old, found during Hurricane Florence, wandering the streets with no collar or chip. He's been with us for 6 months." 6 months? Tempest knelt in front of the kennel, pressing her fingers against the chain link. Storm lifted his head, studying her with intelligent eyes. "Why hasn't anyone adopted him?" "He's particular. Very sweet, completely house-trained, great with kids and other animals. But he seems to be waiting for something. Or someone." Storm rose and padded to the front of the kennel, pressing his nose against Tempest's fingers. The touch sent an unexpected jolt through her chest. Not quite hope, but something warmer than the numbness she'd carried for months. "Can I meet him properly?" Sarah was reaching for the kennel latch when footsteps echoed down the corridor. "Sarah? I'm here for my appointment." The voice was deep, professional, with just a hint of southern drawl that suggested roots, but not born and bred. Tempest turned to see a man approaching, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the humidity, and his green eyes held the kind of focused intensity she recognized in fellow professionals. He looked like the kind of man who balanced his checkbook to the penny and never exceeded the speed limit. "Dr. Beauregard," Sarah beamed. "Perfect timing. I was just showing Storm to—" "I'll take him." The words tumbled out of Tempest's mouth before she could stop them. She stood quickly, brushing dust off her jeans. "Storm. I'll adopt Storm." Dr. Beauregard's perfectly composed expression flickered. "I'm sorry, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I have a 2 o'clock appointment to meet this dog specifically." "Well, I'm here now," Tempest said, crossing her arms, "and he likes me." As if to prove her point, Storm wagged his tail and pressed closer to the kennel door where she'd been kneeling. "I'm sure he does," Dr. Beauregard replied with the patient tone of someone accustomed to being the most reasonable person in the room. "But I've done extensive research on his breed mix, consulted with the veterinary staff about his medical history, and prepared my home specifically for his needs." "Congratulations," Tempest shot back. "I'm sure he'll love living in your spreadsheet." Sarah cleared her throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should all sit down and—" "I don't need to sit down," Tempest interrupted, her voice rising. "I need this dog. Today." Dr. Beauregard studied her with those unsettling green eyes, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he was cataloging her emotional state like symptoms in a medical chart. "Are you dealing with a crisis situation? If you need a therapy animal, there are organizations that can help you find one more suited to—" "I don't need therapy," Tempest snapped, though the words rang hollow even to her own ears. "I need Storm." "Why?" The simple question hit her like a meteorological anomaly, unexpected and devastating. Because Gail would have loved him, because this carriage house echoes with too much silence, because I wake up every morning and wonder why it was her and not me. "Because he's been waiting 6 months for someone to choose him," she said instead. "And I know how that feels." Something shifted in Dr. Beauregard's expression, a crack in that professional composure that let her glimpse something raw underneath. He looked down at Storm, who had moved to the corner of the kennel equidistant from both of them, tail wagging hopefully. "I recently went through a divorce," he said quietly. "My ex-wife took our dog in the settlement. Storm would be—" he'd help fill a very quiet house. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpectedly honest. Tempest felt some of her defensive anger drain away, replaced by an uncomfortable recognition. They were both here for the same reason, really, both trying to patch holes in their lives with unconditional love and wet noses. Sarah was watching them both with an expression Tempest couldn't quite read. "You know," she said slowly, "we do occasionally arrange shared custody in special circumstances." "Shared custody?" Dr. Beauregard's eyebrows shot up. "For a dog?" "It's unusual," Sarah admitted, "but not unheard of. Sometimes when 2 people are both perfect matches for a particular animal, we can work out an arrangement. You'd both go through our adoption process, both take legal responsibility, both contribute to his care." "That's insane," Tempest said at the same time Dr. Beauregard said, "That seems highly impractical." Storm barked once, sharp and attention-getting, making them all look down at him. His tail was wagging furiously now, and if Tempest didn't know better, she'd swear he was grinning. "Just a thought," Sarah said with studied casualness. "You could try it for a week. See how it works. If it doesn't, we'll reassess." Tempest looked at Dr. Beauregard. He looked back at her. The air crackled with the same electrical tension that preceded a storm, and she found herself thinking that his eyes were exactly the color of Spanish moss. "1 week," she said. "1 week," he agreed. The storm barked again, and Sarah's smile was bright enough to power downtown Charleston. Chapter 2, Pressure Systems. Lucas Beauregard was a man who liked systems. His alarm went off at 5:47 a.m. every weekday. Not 5:45, not 5:50, but 5:47, which gave him exactly 13 minutes to shower, 18 minutes to dress and eat breakfast, and 4 minutes to review his schedule before leaving for the Charleston Animal Medical Center at 6:22 a.m. sharp. Systems worked. Systems were predictable. Systems didn't cheat on you with your best friend from college and then take your dog in the divorce settlement because they thought you worked too much to properly care for an animal. What systems definitely didn't account for was a whirlwind of a woman named Tempest showing up at his front door at 7:43 p.m., 16 minutes late for their agreed-upon handoff time, with a golden retriever wearing a collar that looked suspiciously homemade. Sorry, she called, jogging up his front walk with Storm trotting beside her. She was wearing cut-off denim shorts, a tank top that had seen better days, and flip-flops that slapped against the brick walkway. Her red hair was pulled back in what could generously be called a ponytail, but looked more like she'd twisted it up with whatever elastic band she'd found in her car. She looked nothing like the kind of woman Lucas usually found attractive, which was probably why he couldn't stop staring. "You're late," he said, then immediately regretted the words. They made him sound like exactly the kind of uptight control freak Monica was always telling him to stop being. "I know. I'm sorry." Storm and I got caught up exploring the French Quarter. She grinned, unrepentant and slightly breathless. "Did you know there's a ghost tour that allows dogs?" We made friends with a whole group of tourists from Ohio. Lucas looked down at Storm, who was panting happily and did indeed look like he'd had the time of his life. His coat was slightly damp, from humidity or the harbor breeze Lucas couldn't tell, and there were a few leaves caught in his fur. "He should have been walked at 6:30, Lucas said, pulling out his phone to check the detailed schedule he'd created. "Fed at 5:30. Did you remember to give him his joint supplement?" Tempest blinked at him. "Hi, what now?" "Joint supplement for hip dysplasia prevention. I left detailed instructions with Sarah yesterday when I picked up his medical records." "Right, instructions." She bit her lower lip, and Lucas tried not to notice how the gesture made her mouth look ridiculously kissable. "About that. I may have been more focused on the take the dog and love him part than the follow Dr. Beauregard's 17-page care manual part." "It was 3 pages, Lucas said automatically. It felt like 17. Storm chose that moment to bound up the front steps and nearly knock Lucas over in his enthusiasm. Lucas caught himself against the doorframe, laughing despite himself as Storm covered his face with kisses. "He missed you," Tempest observed, her voice softer than it had been a moment before. Lucas looked up to find her watching them both with an unreadable expression. Standing there in his perfectly maintained front garden with her wild hair and secondhand clothes, she looked like chaos incarnate. She also looked beautiful. The kind of beautiful that snuck up on you when you weren't paying attention and rewrote all your carefully organized priorities. "Would you like to come in?" The question slipped out before his logical brain could intervene. "I could show you his schedule. Maybe we could coordinate better." Her smile was like a sunrise breaking through storm clouds. I'd like that. Lucas's house was exactly what Tempest had expected, and nothing like what she'd prepared for. The exterior was classic Charleston, a pristine example of antebellum architecture with a wraparound porch, shutters painted in traditional Charleston green, and a garden that belonged in Southern Living magazine. But inside, the space felt hollow despite its obvious quality. Beautiful furniture arranged with mathematical precision, artwork that looked expensive but impersonal, and not a single thing out of place. It was gorgeous and lifeless, like a museum exhibit on how successful people live. "This is amazing," she said, because it was true, even if it made her feel like she should whisper. "Thank you." Lucas gestured toward a living room that probably cost more than her annual income. "Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee? Whatever you're having is fine." He disappeared into what she assumed was the kitchen, leaving her alone with Storm, who immediately made himself at home on a leather sofa that probably cost more than her car. "Storm," she whispered, "I don't think you're supposed to be on the furniture." Storm wagged his tail and stretched out more comfortably. "He's fine," Lucas called from the kitchen. "I bought that couch specifically with him in mind, the leather wipes clean, and the color hides pet hair." "Of course he did." Tempest wandered toward the mantelpiece, studying the framed photographs arranged there. Lucas in graduation regalia, Lucas with an older couple who had to be his parents, Lucas with a group of people in scrubs at what looked like a veterinary conference, all professional, all perfect, all completely devoid of spontaneous joy. There was one photo that was different. Lucas with a chocolate lab, both of them grinning at the camera in front of what looked like a lake. Lucas looked younger, happier, more relaxed than she'd seen him, the kind of happiness that came from complete, unself-conscious love. "That's Duke," Lucas said behind her. She turned to find him holding 2 glasses of what looked like sweet tea, his expression carefully neutral. "My ex-wife has him now." "I'm sorry." He shrugged, but she caught the tightness around his eyes. "She said I worked too much to be a proper pet parent. Apparently that was the least of my failings as a husband." The words were delivered with clinical detachment, but Tempest heard the hurt underneath. She recognized it because she'd been perfecting her own version of emotional armor for months. "Their loss," she said simply. Lucas handed her the sweet tea and sat down on the opposite end of the couch from Storm, who immediately stretched to put his head on Lucas's lap. "Tell me about your sister." The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Yesterday at the shelter, you said you knew what it felt like to wait for someone to choose you, but you also mentioned your sister in passing. I'm guessing those things are connected." Tempest sank into an armchair that was probably a priceless antique and tried to decide how much truth she was willing to share with this man she barely knew. The smart thing would be to deflect, change the subject, keep things light and surface level. Instead, she found herself saying, "Gail died 8 months ago. Car accident. We were twins, not identical, but we might as well have been. Same thoughts, same dreams, same terrible taste in men." She managed a weak smile. "I came to Charleston because I couldn't stand being in our apartment in Atlanta anymore. Everything reminded me of her." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Storm's ears. "What was she like?" "Everything I'm not. Practical, organized, always thought things through before jumping in. She would have loved this house." Tempest gestured around the immaculate living room. "She probably would have loved you too. You would have made sense to each other. But she's not here." "But she's not here," Tempest agreed softly. "And you are." Something in his tone made her look up, meeting his eyes across the coffee table. The intensity there made her breath catch. "And I am," she whispered. Storm chose that moment to bark and jump off the couch, tail wagging as he trotted toward the front door. "What's he?" Lucas started just as the doorbell rang. They looked at each other, then at Storm, who was now sitting expectantly by the door like he'd ordered takeout. "Did you—" Lucas began. "No, did you—" The doorbell rang again, followed by a cheerful female voice calling, "Lucas?" "It's Monica. I know you're home because your car's in the driveway and you never go anywhere on foot." Lucas closed his eyes briefly. "My colleague from work. Should I, no, it's fine. She'll just keep ringing until one of us answers." He stood and walked to the front door, Storm dancing around his feet. "Monica, what are you doing here?" "Bringing you dinner because I know you've been living on—" A petite woman with short black hair and scrubs pushed into the foyer, carrying takeout bags, then stopped short when she saw Tempest. "Oh, hello. Monica, this is Tempest. Tempest, Dr. Monica Sellers, my colleague and apparently my unsolicited meal delivery service." "The infamous Tempest," Monica said, her grin widening, "the one who's sharing custody of your dog baby." "Monica," Lucas said in a warning tone. "What?" "That's what you called it. Dog baby, like your divorced parents or something." Monica turned to Tempest, clearly delighted. "He's been obsessing over this arrangement all weekend. Made a spreadsheet and everything." Tempest couldn't help but laugh. "A spreadsheet?" "Color-coded," Monica confirmed, "with backup plans for the backup plans." "I like to be prepared," Lucas said stiffly. "He likes to control everything," Monica translated cheerfully. "Which is why this whole situation is probably good for him. Chaos builds character." "I'm not chaos," Tempest protested, though even as she said it, she was aware of her reflection in Lucas's hallway mirror, hair escaping its ponytail, mascara slightly smudged, tank top wrinkled from Storm's enthusiastic greetings. "Honey," Monica said kindly, "you're chaos in the best possible way. And Lucas here needs shaking up more than anyone I know." Lucas looked mortified. Storm looked delighted by all the attention. And Tempest found herself thinking that she liked Dr. Monica Sellers very much. "Well," Monica continued, setting the takeout bags on a side table, "I brought Thai food for 2, but I can certainly share with 3, unless you two were in the middle of something important." Lucas and Tempest exchanged glances. They had been in the middle of something, not important exactly, but significant in a way Tempest couldn't quite name. "Actually," Lucas said slowly, "we should probably discuss Storm's schedule, if you don't mind the company." "I never mind company," Tempest said, "especially companies that bring food." An hour later, they were sitting around Lucas's dining room table with empty takeout containers and a meticulously written schedule that looked like something NASA might use to plan a space launch. "So Tuesday through Thursday, Storm stays with you," Monica was saying, pointing to the color-coded calendar Lucas had created. "Friday through Sunday with Tempest, and Mondays you trade off?" "Alternate Mondays," Lucas corrected, to ensure fairness. "And what happens when one of you wants to travel? Or has a date? Or decides this whole thing is insane and wants out?" Tempest and Lucas looked at each other across the table. It was a good question. Several good questions, actually, and they didn't have answers for any of them. "We'll figure it out," Tempest said finally. "We'll assess and adapt as needed," Lucas said at the same time. Monica laughed. "You two really are perfect for each other." "We're not," Tempest started. "This isn't about," Lucas began. "This is about Storm," they said in unison. Monica's smile was downright smug. "Of course it is." Storm, who had been napping under the table during dinner, chose that moment to wake up and bark once, as if agreeing with Monica's assessment. Later, After Monica had left with promises to check on the happy family soon, Tempest and Lucas stood in his front hallway with Storm between them, the evening stretching awkwardly ahead. "So," Tempest said, "Tuesday pickup at 6 p.m.? "Actually," Lucas pulled out his phone, "I was thinking we might want to exchange numbers. In case of emergencies or schedule changes or if Storm does something adorable and we need to share photographic evidence immediately." Lucas's smile was small but genuine. "Something like that." They exchanged phones, inputting their contact information with the careful formality of people trying not to think too hard about what they were doing. "Tempest Cross," Lucas read from her contact entry. "Storm chaser and weather blogger, that explains a lot." "Lucas Beauregard," Tempest replied, looking at his contact info. "Emergency veterinarian. That explains everything." Their eyes met over their phones, and for a moment, the air between them felt charged with the same electricity that preceded a summer storm. Then Storm barked, and the moment broke. "Right," Tempest said, clipping Storm's leash to his collar. "Tuesday at 6. I'll try to be on time." "You'll try?" She grinned. "I'll succeed. Probably." Lucas watched from his front porch as she walked Storm to her car, a battered Honda Civic with a Storm Chaser bumper sticker and what looked like weather monitoring equipment strapped to the roof. She helped Storm into the back seat, then turned to wave at Lucas before getting in. As her taillights disappeared down the street, Lucas realized he was already looking forward to Tuesday. That should have worried him more than it did. Chapter 3, Eye of the Storm. 3 weeks into the co-parenting arrangement, Tempest was running late. This wasn't unusual. Punctuality had never been her strong suit, and since Gail's death, time had become something fluid and unreliable, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. But today was different. Today she was late because she'd spent 20 minutes standing in her bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror and wondering when she'd started caring what Lucas Beauregard thought of her appearance. She'd changed shirts 3 times, finally settling on a sundress that Gail had bought her last Christmas. Yellow cotton with tiny white flowers, the kind of thing that made her feel feminine and put together without trying too hard. Then she'd immediately change back into jeans and a tank top because wearing her dead sister's clothes to see Lucas felt too much like asking for cosmic intervention in her love life. Not that she had a love life, not that she wanted cosmic intervention. She was just returning Storm to his co-parent, like she had 6 times already. No big deal. Except Storm had learned to open the car windows by himself, and her hair was now a disaster. And Lucas would be waiting on his front porch at exactly 6 p.m., probably with a checklist and a stopwatch, ready to document another instance of her chronic lateness. She pulled into his driveway at 6:17 p.m. and found him exactly where she'd expected, sitting on the porch steps with a glass of sweet tea, looking relaxed and handsome in a way that should be illegal in the state of South Carolina. "Sorry," she called, getting out of the car. Storm decided he needed to say goodbye to every single dog in White Point Garden. "Did he?" Lucas stood as Storm bounded toward him, tail wagging like a metronome set to pure joy. "How many dogs?" 7, plus a cat that was not interested in making friends. Lucas caught Storm in what had become their ritual reunion hug, laughing as the dog covered his face with kisses. Watching them together still did something funny to Tempest's chest, a warm, expanding feeling that she wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. "How was his walk?" Lucas asked, straightening up. "Good. Great, actually. We went down to the Battery, then through Rainbow Row. He's getting better at not lunging at every seagull." "And how are you doing?" The question caught her off guard, partly because Lucas asked it every time they did the handoff, and partly because he asked it like he actually cared about the answer. "I'm good," she said automatically, then paused. Actually, I'm having a weird day. Lucas tilted his head slightly. A gesture she'd learned meant he was shifting into listening mode, the same focused attention he probably gave to worried pet owners at the clinic. Weird how? Tempest looked down at Storm, who was sitting between them with the patient expression of a dog accustomed to human conversation that didn't directly involve him. It's stupid, she said finally. Try me. She took a breath, surprised by how much she wanted to tell him. Over the past 3 weeks, their handoff conversations had gradually extended from polite logistics to actual exchanges, stories about Storm's adventures, updates on their respective jobs, the occasional shared joke about their dog's increasingly diva-like behavior. But this felt different, more personal. I had a good day, she said quietly. Like a genuinely good day. I woke up happy, had coffee without thinking about Gail, wrote a blog post that didn't mention grief or healing or moving on. I took Storm to the dog park and flirted with a cute guy who was there with his beagle. Lucas's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. That sounds like a very good day. It was. And then I felt guilty about it. The words came out in a rush. Like I was betraying her by being happy. Like I was supposed to stay sad forever as some kind of memorial. And now I'm standing here telling you about it instead of the cute guy with the beagle. She looked up at him, searching his face. What does that say about me? Lucas was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Storm's head. When he spoke, his voice was careful and thoughtful. I think it says you're healing, and that healing isn't linear or predictable or fair to anyone involved. Is that your professional opinion, Dr. Beauregard? It's my personal experience, Miss Cross. The way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. She realized they were standing closer than they usually did during handoffs, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes and smell the faint scent of his aftershave. Lucas, she said, and his name felt different in her mouth than it had before, less formal, more intimate. Tempest. They were moving closer, or maybe the space between them was just contracting on its own, drawn by some meteorological phenomenon she couldn't explain. She could see the exact moment Lucas realized what was happening, could watch his careful composure crack just slightly. Then Storm barked and took off running toward the street. Storm! They both called in unison, sprinting after him. The next few minutes were chaos. Storm had spotted a squirrel and was determined to introduce himself, despite the minor obstacle of a busy Charleston street between them. Tempest ran one direction, Lucas the other, both calling Storm's name with increasing panic. They finally cornered him 2 blocks away in front of a tourist carriage, where he was being enthusiastically petted by a group of college students who were cooing over his beautiful golden coat and sweet baby face. Storm, Lucas said, slightly out of breath. You're going to give me a heart attack. He's gorgeous, one of the students said. Is he yours? Tempest and Lucas looked at each other over Storm's head, both still breathing hard from the chase. He's ours, Tempest said without thinking. We're co-parenting, Lucas added, and immediately looked like he regretted the clarification. The students exchanged meaningful glances and grins, the kind that suggested they thought co-parenting was probably a euphemism for something much more interesting. That's so sweet, one of them said, like a modern family. Like a family, Tempest thought as they walked back to Lucas's house, Storm trotting contentedly between them on his leash. The words echoed in her head with dangerous warmth. I should probably get going, she said when they reached his front porch, though she made no move toward her car. You could stay for dinner, Lucas said quickly, then seemed surprised by his own words. I mean, I was going to grill some chicken. There's plenty for 2, 3, if you count Storm's inevitable begging. Tempest knew she should say no, should stick to their arrangement, maintain their boundaries, not complicate an already complicated situation with shared meals and almost kisses, and the way Lucas looked at her like she was something precious and breakable. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. Lucas's smile was like a sunrise breaking through storm clouds. 2 hours later, they were sitting on his back porch with empty plates and a bottle of wine that had somehow appeared from Lucas's kitchen. The storm was sprawled between their chairs, belly full of chicken scraps and utterly content. The conversation had flowed as easily as the wine, stories about their childhoods, their careers, their hopes and fears, and the dreams they'd given up or were still chasing. Tempest learned that Lucas had wanted to be a marine biologist before veterinary school, that he played guitar but only when he was sure no one could hear him, that his favorite thing about Charleston was the way the light looked different depending on the weather. Lucas learned that Tempest had a master's degree in atmospheric science, that she'd once chased a tornado across 3 states for a documentary that never got made, that she talked to Gail's picture every morning and sometimes felt crazy for it. "It's not crazy," Lucas said when she confessed this last part. "Grief makes us do things that feel crazy to everyone else but make perfect sense to us." "Speaking from experience again?" He nodded, swirling the wine in his glass. "After the divorce, I used to drive past my old house every night on my way home from work, just to see if the lights were on, if Duke was in the yard. Completely pathetic behavior, but I couldn't stop myself." "What made you stop?" "Monica threatened to have me committed. Also, my ex-wife filed a restraining order." Tempest choked on her wine. "She didn't." "She did. Apparently, concerned about the dog's well-being doesn't qualify as a valid reason for property surveillance." They dissolved into laughter, the kind that borders on hysteria and serves as a release valve for too much honesty and wine and emotional vulnerability. When they finally caught their breath, the sun was setting behind the live oaks in Lucas's backyard, casting everything in golden light. Tempest felt warm and loose and dangerously happy. "I should go," she said, making no effort to move from her chair. "You should," Lucas agreed, not looking at her. "Storm needs to get to bed at a reasonable hour." "He does." "And I have an early morning." "Do you?" She turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her. "No, not really." "I don't have anywhere to be either." The admission hung between them like a challenge. Storm, apparently sensing the shift in mood, lifted his head to look back and forth between his humans with the expression of a dog who understood more than he let on. "Lucas," Tempest said softly. "I know." His voice was rough. "This is complicated. Very complicated. We have an arrangement. Rules. Good rules. Practical rules. We should stick to them. We absolutely should." Neither of them moved. The kiss, when it finally happened, felt as inevitable as weather. Lucas reached for her at the same moment she leaned toward him, their mouths meeting somewhere in the space between their chairs with desperate, wine-sweet urgency. He tasted like summer and possibility and all the things she'd convinced herself she didn't want. His hand tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she went willingly, all her careful emotional barriers crumbling like sandcastles at high tide. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Storm was watching them with what could only be described as smug satisfaction. "Well," Tempest said shakily, "that happened." "That happened," Lucas agreed, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "What do we do now?" "I have absolutely no idea." Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She ignored it, but it buzzed again, then again in rapid succession. "You should probably check that," Lucas said, though he didn't remove his hand from her face. Tempest reluctantly pulled out her phone, glancing at the screen. Her weather alert app was going crazy. Severe thunderstorm warning, tornado watch, possible hail, and damaging winds. "Storm's coming," she said, and immediately realized how that sounded. Weather storm. Big one. Moving in fast. As if summoned by her words, thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat raindrops began to fall. "You can't drive home in this," Lucas said, looking up at the rapidly darkening sky. "I can wait it out." Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder that made them both jump. Storm whined and pressed closer to Lucas's legs. "You're staying here tonight," Lucas said, and it wasn't a question. Tempest looked at him, then at the storm gathering overhead, then at Storm, who was now trembling against Lucas's chair. The smart thing would be to make a run for her car, drive home slowly, pretend this evening had never happened. Instead, she nodded. "I'll take the couch," she said. "Don't be ridiculous. I have a guest room." Another flash of lightning, another rumble of thunder. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the porch roof with increasing intensity. They gathered up the dinner dishes and wine glasses, hurrying inside as the storm unleashed itself on Charleston. Storm pressed close to their legs, clearly anxious about the weather, ironic considering his name. "He doesn't like storms," Lucas explained, kneeling down to comfort the dog. "The shelter thinks he might have been traumatized during the hurricane when he was found." Tempest watched Lucas gentle Storm with patient hands and soft words, and felt something crack open in her chest. She'd spent months convincing herself that she was fine alone, that she didn't need anyone, that loving people was just setting herself up for more loss. But watching Lucas care for their anxious dog with such tenderness made her want things she thought she was done wanting. "The guest room is upstairs, first door on the right," Lucas said, still focused on Storm. "There are clean towels in the bathroom, and I think Monica left some of her emergency clothes in the dresser from the last time she crashed here after a double shift." "Thank you." Tempest hesitated at the bottom of the stairs. "Lucas?" He looked up at her, Storm now calmer in his arms. "About what happened outside." "We don't have to figure it out tonight," he said gently. "Tonight, we just weather the storm." Upstairs, Tempest found the guest room exactly as she'd expected. Tastefully decorated in neutral tones, everything in its proper place. A bed that looked like it had been made by someone who'd learned military corners. The dresser did indeed contain an assortment of scrubs and casual clothes in her size, courtesy of the practical Dr. Sellers. She changed into borrowed pajama pants and an oversized t-shirt that smelled faintly of fabric softener and Lucas's house, clean and warm and somehow comforting. Through the window, she could see the storm raging over Charleston, lightning illuminating the live oaks in Lucas's backyard in stark, dramatic flashes. She should be documenting this, she thought. Should be on her laptop, tracking the storm's path, writing about wind speeds and barometric pressure, and the fascinating meteorology of summer thunderstorms in the low country. Instead, she found herself listening to the sounds of Lucas moving around downstairs, the soft murmur of his voice as he talked to Storm, the click of lights being turned off, the creak of old floorboards as he made his way upstairs. He paused outside her door, and she held her breath, wondering if he would knock, wondering what she would say if he did. But his footsteps continued down the hall to what she assumed was his bedroom, and she released the breath she'd been holding, surprised by her own disappointment. She was almost asleep when she heard the soft whine. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then it came again, a distinctly canine sound of distress. She slipped out of bed and cracked open the door, peering into the hallway. Storm was sitting outside Lucas's bedroom door, tail tucked under him, trembling with each rumble of thunder. "Hey, buddy," she whispered, kneeling down beside him. "Scared of the big bad storm?" Storm looked up at her with soulful brown eyes and whined again, pressing his head against her hand. "Want to come sleep with me?" Before Storm could respond, Lucas's bedroom door opened, revealing him in pajama pants and a t-shirt, hair mussed from sleep. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly. Storm's having some anxiety about the weather situation. Lucas looked down at their dog, who was now pressed against Tempest's side like she was a security blanket. "He usually sleeps in my room during storms, but I think he's confused about where he belongs tonight." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning that had nothing to do with sleeping arrangements. "He could sleep with both of us," Tempest said, then immediately felt heat flood her cheeks. "I mean, if your bed is big enough, just until the storm passes." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim hallway light. "My bed is big enough," he said finally. 10 minutes later, Tempest found herself lying in Lucas's king-size bed, with Storm curled up between them like the world's most effective chaperone. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside Lucas's bedroom, everything felt calm and safe and surprisingly right. "Better?" Lucas asked Storm, who had already relaxed into sleep. "Much better," Tempest answered instead, then realized how that sounded. "I mean, he seems much calmer." "He does," Lucas agreed, but his voice suggested he wasn't really talking about the dog either. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to Storm's soft breathing and the rain against the windows. Tempest was acutely aware of Lucas's presence beside her, the warmth radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the way he smelled like soap and something uniquely him. "Tempest?" His voice was soft in the darkness. "What happened to us tonight?" She turned onto her side, facing him across Storm's sleeping form. In the dim light filtering through the curtains, she could just make out the line of his profile, the concern in his eyes. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Something shifted. Are you okay with that?" She considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, she would have said no. 3 hours ago, she would have said no. But lying here in his bed, with their dog between them and the storm outside, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Gail's death. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. "Are you?" she asked instead. "I think so. That scares me a little." "Just a little?" His quiet laugh rumbled through the darkness. "A lot. It scares me a lot." "Good," she said, surprising herself. "If it didn't scare you, it probably wouldn't be worth doing." "Is that your professional opinion, Storm Chaser?" "That's my personal experience, emergency veterinarian." They were quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, charged with possibility and the acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed between them. "Lucas? I'm glad I'm here." She felt rather than saw his smile. "I'm glad you're here too." Outside, the storm began to weaken, thunder becoming more distant, rain settling into a gentle, steady patter. Storm stretched in his sleep, somehow managing to take up even more of the bed despite his position between them. Tempest closed her eyes and let herself relax into the strange, wonderful comfort of being exactly where she was supposed to be. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without thinking about loss or loneliness or the empty spaces that grief had carved in her life. She fell asleep thinking about possibility. The morning brought sunshine and regret in equal measure. Tempest woke up alone in Lucas's bed, with Storm curled against her side and the sound of coffee brewing downstairs. Bright light streamed through the windows, making everything from the night before seem like a dream or a mistake. What had she been thinking? Getting involved with Lucas would complicate everything. Their arrangement worked because it was practical, businesslike, focused entirely on Storm's well-being. Adding romance to the mix was like trying to predict hurricane paths. Too many variables, too much potential for disaster. She found her clothes from the night before and changed quickly, trying to ignore the way Lucas's t-shirt smelled like him and the way wearing it made her feel claimed in some primitive, dangerous way. Downstairs, Lucas was standing at the kitchen island with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested he'd been doing his own share of morning after overthinking. "Good morning," he said carefully. "Morning." She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. Storm slept well. He did. They stood there awkwardly, the easy intimacy of the night before replaced by the harsh light of day and second thoughts. "About last night," Lucas began. "We should probably talk about boundaries," Tempest said at the same time. They looked at each other across the kitchen island, and Tempest felt her heart sink at the carefully neutral expression on Lucas's face. He was retreating behind his professional composure, putting distance between them with the skill of someone who'd had practice at protecting himself. "Right," he said. "Boundaries. That's probably wise." "We have a good arrangement," she continued, hating herself for each word. "It works for Storm. We shouldn't complicate it." "We shouldn't," he agreed, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment maybe, or hurt. "So we go back to how things were. Co-parents, nothing more." "Nothing more," he echoed. Storm chose that moment to wander into the kitchen, tail wagging, completely oblivious to the tension between his humans. He went to Lucas first, receiving the expected morning pets and baby talk, then trotted over to Tempest for his second round of attention. "I should get going," Tempest said, kneeling down to give Storm a goodbye hug. "Let you both get on with your Sunday." "Tempest," Lucas said as she headed for the door. "Are you sure this is what you want?" She paused with her hand on the doorknob, not trusting herself to look back at him. "It's what makes sense," she said instead. But as she drove away from his house, watching him and Storm grow smaller in her rearview mirror, nothing about the situation felt like it made sense at all. To be continued in part 2.